James Brown was going through old boxes in his Atlanta mansion when he found a photograph that made his hands tremble. There she was, Velma Warren, the woman who had believed in him when he was nobody, the woman who had quietly walked away in 1969. What he was about to discover about why she really left would completely change how he understood love, sacrifice, and the true cost of becoming a legend. This isn't just a story about the Godfather of Soul. It's about the woman who created him, the secret she kept for 30 years, and the choice that saved them both. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're fascinated by the untold stories behind music legends, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next. It was a quiet afternoon in December 2003 when James Brown decided to clean out his study. He was 70 years old, his health declining, and something told him it was time to face the past he'd been running from his entire life. His assistant brought boxes from storage, old memories his mother Catherine had saved from the Talcoa days. In a dusty cardboard box labeled James 1953, he found a stack of photographs wrapped in yellowed newspaper. The first photo stopped him cold. James stared at the photo for a long time, his finger tracing Velma's face. 16 years they'd been married. 16 years of struggling together, dreaming together, building something from absolutely nothing. And then, in 1969, she was gone. Just like that. The divorce papers arrived while he was on tour, and she'd moved back to Talcoa without explanation. No screaming matches, no public drama, just silence. He'd always assumed she left because she couldn't handle the fame, couldn't compete with the screaming crowds and the constant touring and the women throwing themselves at him every night. But as James dug deeper into the box, he found something that would shatter everything he thought he knew. It was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to James in Velma's handwriting. The postmark read April 15th, 1969, right before their divorce was finalized. It had never been opened. May 1953. James's hands shook as he held that envelope, but before he could open it, he needed to go back to the beginning, to understand what that letter might contain. May 1953. James Brown had just been paroled from Alto Reform School after serving 3 years for armed robbery. He was 20 years old with a criminal record, no money, no prospects, and a dream that everyone told him was impossible. He wanted to sing. Bobby Bird invited him to sing with his gospel group. That's where he met Velma Warren, Bobby's neighbor, a nursing student. She was the only person who looked at him like he was human, not a criminal. Velma smiled at him, a real smile, and said she'd love to hear him sing. James almost laughed. He was an ex-convict whose mother had abandoned him at 4. Nobody wanted to hear him sing. Nobody had ever wanted to hear him sing before. They just wanted him to disappear. But Velma's eyes held his, and she said something that planted a seed deep in his broken heart. I believe people can become anything they decide to be. Past doesn't have to be future. Those words, spoken by a 19-year-old nursing student in a small Georgia town, gave James Brown the first real hope he'd ever felt. But what he didn't know that day was the sacrifice Velma would make to protect that hope. Over the next 6 months, James and Velma grew close. He joined Bobby's gospel group, and Velma came to every show, always believing. James had never had anyone believe in him like that. But Velma saw the hunger in him, the need to matter, to be worth keeping. By December 1953, they were married. James was 20, Velma was 19, and everyone told them they were making a mistake. Her family wasn't happy about her marrying an ex-convict with no income. But Velma stood firm. I'm not marrying what he is now, she told her father. I'm marrying what he's going to become. And she meant it. What followed were years that would test Velma's faith to its absolute limit. She worked double shifts as a nurse, while James chased his impossible dream. The famous Flames practiced constantly, performing anywhere that would have them for whatever money they could scrape together. She held him together during the endless rejection, during the doors slammed in their faces, during the nights when giving up seemed easier than breathing. She never asked him to quit. She never demanded he get a real job. She just worked and believed and loved a man who didn't know how to love himself. In 1956, Federal Records offered a contract for Please, Please, Please. The song was raw, desperate, built on James's abandonment trauma. It sold, slowly then faster, until people started paying attention. By 1962, James recorded live at the Apollo. He was becoming a phenomenon. Velma sat in the audience, watching her husband transform into something she barely recognized. It was extraordinary, but terrifying. He was disappearing into the persona, losing the man she'd married. The Apollo album went to number 2 and stayed on the charts for months. Suddenly they had money. Real money, everything they dreamed about during those hungry Talcoa years. But success came with a price Velma hadn't anticipated. James was on the road 300 nights a year. When he was home, which was rare, he wasn't really present. His mind was always on the next show, the next recording, the next mountain to climb. Velma tried to hold on to the man she'd believed in. But that man was disappearing beneath layers of fame and ego, and a hunger that feeding only made stronger. By 1965, when Papa's Got a Brand New Bag revolutionized music and created funk, Velma knew she was losing him. Not to another woman, though there were plenty of those. She was losing him to something worse, to the applause of thousands of strangers who loved James Brown, the icon, but didn't know James Brown, the man who still woke up screaming from nightmares about his mother leaving. The man who worked himself to exhaustion because stopping meant feeling the pain he'd been outrunning his entire life. By 1968, Velma had made a decision that would haunt her for decades. She couldn't stay married to James anymore. Not because she stopped loving him, but because staying meant watching him destroy himself. She watched him save Boston after Martin Luther King's assassination. Watched him become a hero. Watched the world finally see what she'd always seen. But she also watched him come home to their empty house and realize that he could calm a nation, but couldn't calm the war inside his own heart. The man who sang, "Say It Loud." "I'm black and I'm proud," couldn't say I'm enough. The man who preached dignity to millions couldn't find dignity in being still, in being quiet, in being just James, instead of James Brown the legend. In March 1969, Velma asked James for a divorce. He was on tour, and he barely reacted. He signed the papers without asking why. Maybe he'd always known this was coming. The divorce was finalized in April 1969. Velma moved back to Talcoa, resumed her nursing career, and disappeared from James Brown's life as quietly as she'd entered it 16 years before. No press coverage, no tell-all interviews, no explanation, just gone. James threw himself into work even harder after Velma left. He remarried within a year to Deidre Jenkins, then Adrienne Rodriguez, then Tommy Ray Heine. 4 marriages total, each one following the same pattern, initial passion giving way to absence, to violence, to the slow realization that James Brown the man and James Brown the performer were the same person, and that person couldn't sustain real intimacy. But none of them were Velma. None of them had known him when he was nobody. None of them had believed in him before the world gave them permission. And that's what haunted James for the next 34 years. Not the women who left after the fame, but the woman who stayed before, who saw something in him worth fighting for, and who he couldn't keep because keeping her would have required him to stop running. And James Brown didn't know how to stop running. December 2003. James sat in his study, holding that unopened envelope, knowing that inside was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 34 years. Why did you really leave, Velma? His hands trembled as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, 5 pages long, written in Velma's careful handwriting. He began to read, and with each line, his understanding of everything shifted. My dearest James, if you're reading this, it means I finally had the courage to tell you the truth I've been hiding for 16 years. I'm leaving you, but not for the reasons you think. I'm not leaving because of the fame or the touring or even the other women, though God knows those things hurt. I'm leaving because I'm dying, James, and I can't let you watch me die. In January 1968, I was diagnosed with lupus. The doctors gave me 2 to 5 years. I've known for over a year that my time is limited, and I've watched you destroy yourself trying to outrun death, trying to be so legendary that maybe you'll live forever. I can't add my death to the weight you're already carrying. You've spent your entire life terrified of being abandoned. Your mother left when you were 4. Your father abandoned you emotionally long before that. Every relationship you've ever had has been colored by that fear. And now I'm going to leave too, but not by choice. The lupus is going to take me, James, and I can't let you be there when it does. James stopped reading, tears streaming down his face. She was dying. She'd been dying when she left. She hadn't abandoned him. She'd protected him. The letter continued. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should have told you that you had a right to know, that we could have fought this together. But James, we both know that's not true. If I'd told you I was sick, you would have stopped everything. You would have quit touring, quit recording, quit being James Brown. And the world needs James Brown more than I need you to watch me die. I've made my peace with this, my love. I've had a beautiful life because of you. You gave a nursing student from Toccoa something she never dreamed of. A front row seat to greatness, a chance to watch a broken boy become a legend. But more than that, you gave me purpose, believing in you when no one else did. That was my gift to the world. Helping you become who you were meant to be. That's my legacy. So I'm leaving quietly. I'm going back to Toccoa, back to nursing, back to a simple life. And I'm asking you not to look for me. Let me go, James. Let me disappear into the life I had before you. And let yourself become the legend you were always meant to be without the weight of my dying on your shoulders. This is my final gift to you. The freedom to soar without watching me fall. I loved you from the moment I saw you in Bobby's house in 1953. I loved you when you had nothing but dreams and hunger. I loved you when the world discovered what I always knew, that you were extraordinary. And I love you now, enough to let you go, enough to disappear so you don't have to watch another woman you love leave you. But this time, James, it's not because you're not enough. It's because you're everything, and the world needs you more than I do. Keep singing, my love. Keep dancing. Keep being the hardest working man in show business. And know that somewhere, even if you never see me again, I'm still believing in you. Always yours, Velma. James sat motionless for nearly an hour after finishing the letter, his mind reeling. Velma had been dying. She'd left to protect him, not because she stopped loving him. Everything he'd believed for 34 years was wrong. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. I need you to find someone for me, he said quietly. Velma Warren from Toccoa, Georgia. She'd be about 70 now. It took the investigators less than 48 hours to locate her. Velma Warren was alive. The lupus hadn't killed her. She'd beaten it somehow, defied the doctor's predictions, and spent the last 34 years working as a nurse at Toccoa General Hospital. She'd never remarried. She'd lived quietly, helping others, and according to the report, her small apartment was covered with James Brown posters and album covers. She'd followed his entire career, collected every recording, watched from a distance as he became exactly what she'd always known he would be. The investigator included one more detail that broke James's heart. Velma had tried to contact him 17 times over the years. Letters to record labels, messages sent through concert venues. Even a letterhand delivered to his mother, Catherine, asking her to tell James she was still alive, that she'd survived. None of the messages had ever reached him. The next morning, James picked up his phone and dialed the number his investigator had provided. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, older but unmistakable. "Hello? Velma," he said softly. "This is James." There was a long silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "James? Is this really you?" "It's really me, Velma. I found your letter. The one you wrote in 1969. Velma started crying immediately. Deep sobs that seemed to come from 34 years of held-back grief. "Oh God, James. You weren't supposed to read that. I sealed it but couldn't send it. I couldn't let you know. I know why you left." James's voice broke. "I know about the lupus. I know you were trying to protect me. I'm so sorry I never got your messages. I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone." Over the next 3 hours, James and Velma talked about everything. His struggles with fame and addiction, her battle with lupus, and the experimental treatment that saved her life. The paths their lives had taken since that devastating goodbye in 1969. "You thought you were going to die," James said, "so you left to save me from watching it happen. And you survived." "I survived," Velma confirmed. "The lupus went into remission in 1972. I wanted to tell you so many times, but by then you'd remarried, and I thought maybe it was better to let you believe I was gone." "You thought wrong," James said fiercely. "I spent 34 years thinking you abandoned me like everyone else, thinking I wasn't enough to make you stay. James." Velma's voice was thick with tears. "You were always enough. You were too much, too bright, too important. The world needed you, and I was just one woman who was supposed to die. But staying would have kept you in Toccoa watching me fade, instead of becoming the legend you were meant to be." James was quiet for a long moment. "The legend feels empty without the woman who created him," he said. "All the applause never filled the hole you left." Velma sobbed. "The world needs James Brown." "I need Velma Warren," James said. "I've needed her for 34 years. I've tried to fill that need with music and women and success, and it never worked. Because what I needed was the only person who ever believed in me when I had nothing to offer but dreams." But what James did next would shock everyone who knew him. Within a week, James Brown announced he was taking his first real break from performing in over 40 years. He traveled to Toccoa and spent 3 weeks with Velma, not as the Godfather of Soul, but as James, the man she'd married in 1953. 6 months later, James and Velma announced something that surprised the music world. They were establishing the Velma Warren Brown Foundation for Artists and Caregivers, dedicated to supporting both young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds and the family caregivers who sacrifice their own dreams to support others. This foundation exists because a woman loved a man enough to disappear so he could become who he was meant to be, James explained at the launch. And because that man spent 34 years learning that success without connection is just another kind of poverty. The foundation's approach was revolutionary. It provided full scholarships for young artists while also supporting their families financially. ensuring that pursuing artistic dreams didn't require choosing between passion and responsibility. It also funded caregiver support programs, honoring Velma's years of nursing and her sacrifice of walking away to protect James's future. Velma became the foundation's director, bringing her decades of nursing experience and her understanding of sacrifice to help families navigate the impossible choices between supporting loved ones and pursuing their own dreams. At foundation events, James and Velma would appear together, telling their story of love and sacrifice and redemption. "I left James Brown in 1969 because I thought I was dying," Velma would tell audiences. "I thought the greatest gift I could give him was freedom from watching me die. But I was wrong. The greatest gift would have been trusting him with the truth." And I, James would add, spent 34 years trying to fill the hole her absence left with fame and applause, and it never worked. Because what I really needed wasn't validation from millions of strangers. It was connection with the one person who saw me before I was extraordinary and loved me anyway. Today, the Velma Warren Brown Foundation has helped over 4,000 young artists and their families. Success stories include musicians who never had to choose between their dreams and supporting their parents, caregivers who got the support they needed to pursue their own passions, families who didn't have to sacrifice one member's future for another's survival. But the most important legacy isn't measured in statistics. It's measured in the story James and Velma tell together, a story about love and sacrifice and second chances. Sometimes, the people who leave us aren't abandoning us, they tell audiences. Sometimes they're protecting us from pain they think we can't survive. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone go, even when it breaks your heart. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to do it right. James Brown passed away on December 25, 2006. With Velma by his side. In his final days, he told her something that brought their story full circle. "I spent 50 years trying to become someone extraordinary enough that people would never leave me. But the only time I ever felt like I was enough was when I was with you in Tocoa, when I was just James and you believed in me anyway." Velma still runs the foundation today at age 81. She tells people that James Brown changed music forever. But more importantly, he showed millions of people that broken boys can become legends if someone believes in them first. And James showed her that sometimes love means holding on when the world tells you to let go. And sometimes it means coming back when you thought you'd lost everything forever. If this story moved you, remember that the people in your life may be making sacrifices you don't see, carrying burdens they won't share, loving you in ways you don't understand. Sometimes, the person who walks away is actually giving you the greatest gift they know how to give. And sometimes, decades later, you discover that the person who broke your heart was actually trying to save it.